I'm Amy from Doodle Dog Designs. Today I'm going to dye some wool, and I want it to have a model look more like these, where they have lots of different variations of the color in the wool, and not like these where it's just a completely solid wool. I'm going to dye two different pieces of wool. I'm going to dye this piece here that has some stripes, a little bit of a checked plaid to it, and then I'm going to dye this solid cream piece. Both of these have been felted. If you're new to this, I have a video where I show you how you can felt your wool in a front load washing machine. I'll put a link to that in the description below. Both of these pieces are fairly small pieces of wool because I'm just going to do a sample piece. They're about 8 inches by 13 inches. And I like to use Cushing's dyes. So I looked at my color chart and the colors that I have on hand, and I have a pink, which is right here, and that's probably a little too pink for what I want. So I'm going to tone it down, hopefully with a taupe, which is this one right here. So I'm going to mix these two colors together to dye my wool. Each package of Cushing's dye will dye 1 pound of wool, and so I'm going to measure my wool. I know I don't have anywhere near a pound. It looks like I have 1.9 ounces of wool, so I won't need to use anywhere near an entire packet. I like to use just a small amount of water in my saucepan to dissolve the dye in before I get started, and usually then I transfer it to a big dye pot. But because I want it to be mottled and I have such a small amount of wool, I want the wool to not have a lot of room to move around, so I'm going to dye in this pot. So I will dissolve the powdered dyes in here, and then I will add more water to this pot. If you're new to dyeing, I have a getting started tutorial. I will put a link in the description below to that. So I'm going to use some of my pink, and all of my utensils and pans that I use when I'm dyeing, I use exclusively for dyeing. And I have just a stainless steel set of measuring teaspoons, a regular set, and then I have a small set which has from 1/4 down to a 64th of a teaspoon. I'll put a link in the description below to these. These are very handy for measuring out small amounts of dye. So I'm going to start, I'm just guessing here, I'm going to start with 1/8 of a teaspoon of the pink. And of the taupe, I'm going to use the smallest that I have, the 64th teaspoon. And I can always add more later if I don't feel like the color is just right, but I can't take it back away. I have a stainless steel spoon that I use just for dyeing. Now, in order to see what this color, kind of get a little bit of an idea what this color is going to be like, I've got a white paper towel. I'm just going to dip it in. Looks pretty good, but maybe still just a little bit too pink. So I'm going to add a little bit more taupe. I'll do the 64th teaspoon again, so it'll give me a total of 1/32. See what that color looks like. This is the first, and that's now. I think it's looking pretty good. I like that. Now, normally what I do next is I put my dye liquid into a big pot that I already have some water in, and then I make sure I have enough water so that the wool can freely move around. But in this instance, one of the ways to get the mottled look is to kind of have the wool crammed into the pot. So I'm going to do it in the opposite manner. I'm going to add a little bit of water as I add my fabric. One other thing to note here is that normally I soak my wool in water and get it saturated before adding it to the dye pot, and that helps the dye soak up evenly. And again, I don't want that today, so I'm going to be putting my wool in just completely dry. So I'm going to add water now, and at the same time I'm going to add my wool. I don't want to add too much water. Now I'm going to put this back on the stove, turn it on to cook. So normally if you want a nice solid color of wool, you want to, like I said, soak the wool before you put it in the dye pot. And second, you want to make sure that there's plenty of water in there where the wool can move around freely. And third, you want to stir frequently. So if you want it to look mottled, you want to have a smaller amount of water and don't stir as often. Do want to make sure that it all gets in the water and it all has a chance to get a little bit of the dye. Now I'm just going to let that come to a simmer. Adding some vinegar to set the color in the wool. I'm going to let it simmer until the dye water runs clear. You can tell this easier by putting a spoon in there. You can see it's pretty clear now. And then the last step is to rinse it. I still need to hang this out to dry, but I can tell it has a nice mottled look to it. This is the one that was the pattern wool, and this was the solid cream wool. They both have a nice texture to them. It's not really the color I was looking for, but it's a pretty color. When I mix colors like that, it's always an experiment, and I never know what I'm going to end up with. Here are the two wools after they're dried. This one is the one that had the texture pattern to it, and this is the solid cream. They turned out to be a very pretty dusty rose color. When you have the mottled colors like this, they really look very pretty when you're using them in the rug cooking. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.